Hi, today is Saturday, August 12th, 2017, and this is A Swede Speaks. And I'm in Stockholm to meet with Jan Sjunnesson. And maybe you could tell our viewers, who you are and what you're doing.
Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Swede Speaks. My name is Jan Sjunnesson, and I'm a writer and an educator. And I've been writing and having public debates around migration and Swedish politics the last 5-6 years. But before that, I was a journalist, and I worked at universities in Stockholm and Uppsala. And my position now is that I'm a part of the Sweden Democratic Party.
Yes.
And but I don't have an official position there. I'm just a member, but I'm usually putting forward their views in the debates in Sweden. I'm somewhat of an independent Sweden Democrat. And I've also been allowed in the Swedish national television to speak and also to write on their blogs. So for some people I'm still controversial, but I would say that the last years I've been more and more accepted into the Swedish debate.
I know that you're interested in the Nordic countries and the situation regarding conservatism in Sweden and in the Nordic neighbors. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, you see, I've been affiliated with I would say Scandinavia to start with, not Finland, but Norway and especially Denmark.
Yes.
Since I went to something called Nordens Folkhögskola Biskopsarne, the Nordic folk high school Biskopsarne between Stockholm and Uppsala. I went to media course there for a year, and we had lots of interaction with mostly cultural, mostly literature, and the circumstances around media in Scandinavia. And after that year I moved actually to Copenhagen to work as a freelance journalist. So I learned Danish, and I don't write Danish very well, but I can very well understand it, and I got a very good insight into Danish culture. So after that I was engaged in something called the Nordic Summer University, NSU,
Yes.
which is an inter-Nordic university network for PhD graduates and just scholars and I would say youth, college or university youth. It's a bit activist oriented, and that time I was more leaning to the left. But I got lots of contacts in Scandinavia and also including Finland during that time. It was for about 10 years. And that NSU establishment has had a large impact on the culture Marxism in Scandinavia.
Right.
I was a part of that too, unfortunately. I translated Foucault, and I did my master's thesis on Gilles Deleuze, and I did lots of things around French post-strategic philosophy, but also around American pragmatism, which ended that I interviewed Richard Rorty and wrote pieces about him. So myself, I got into what I would say quite advanced philosophical and cultural discussion that was going on in Norway, Denmark and Sweden. I also learned that, you see, I'm a humanities scholar. I was a PhD student in philosophy. I also learned that the humanities in Norway and especially Denmark are a lot better than they are in Sweden. Even though my friends and I'm too at that time was a Marxist, I would say that the Marxists in Denmark and Norway were much more well-read in general humanities. I mean, the history of Western canon and Western civilization. So I learned to respect the old type of scholarship because they learned Latin.
Yes.
They knew more of ancient Greek than I did, although I was a philosopher. So the whole culture education in Sweden or in German, you say Bildning.
Yes.
I found that the Norwegian and the Danish,
Dannelse.
they were a lot more educated
Yes.
and well-rounded in their scholarship than I was.
Actually, I know that if you study at the Norwegian university or college, there is a mandatory course, and it doesn't matter what you're going to study. If you're studying theology or history or natural sciences or whatever, you still have to read Examen Philosophicum, Examen Philosophic. So you have to study this. I think the left would say this is the mandatory course in the dead old white guys.
Yes.
So well, I took that course a few years ago. So yeah, we had to learn about the old Greeks and also some of the more modern. And I think they had the same in Denmark before, but I think they've abolished it, sadly, or sadly according to me. And I think that might be a reason why even the Marxists were better read than their Swedish counterparts.
The whole idea of education I found in, especially Denmark, because I lived there and I knew it better, but the whole idea of education was much more fulfilling and in depth than they were in Sweden. So all of my reading I've done outside university, but university has been a place where I also have worked later outside university. But I found that through this inter-Scandinavian or inter-Nordic network, I learned a lot more about American, European history and philosophy. So in that sense, my way out in the world was actually through Scandinavia.
Yes.
And last year I was invited to discussion in Oslo to discuss, actually they wanted to pinpoint me as a pro-Trump protagonist.
Yes,
and
right.
The discussion was about fake news and all that. But it turned out that I was there for the Swedish alternative media, Pixlar.
Yes.
But it turned out that it was me and there were 3 other journalists. I would say that the majority of the people in the panel was actually on my side in criticizing this idea that everyone should sort of be against Trump and pro CNN and not to discuss what's coming from that side.
Yes.
So I would say that, and that was a kind of debate that it's not possible to have in Sweden yet. To have journalists, this was organized by a journalist organization in Oslo.
Yes.
And to imagine that Svenska Journalistförbundet, they are here
the Swedish reporters.
Vasagatan, they just number 50 down the street here where we are in Stockholm. To imagine that they would have discussion around, let's say, alternative media and fake news, and I would be there as representative of the alternative media scene. Also work with something called Swedish web television.
Yes.
We're not there yet. So in that sense, Norway is still ahead of Sweden in allowing that kind of debate.
Yes, and I think I used to say that Norway is between Sweden and Denmark, not only geographically but also culturally, ideologically. The Danes are probably the ones with the freest, the highest amount of free speech, the toughest debate on several things, and they've got the toughest policies when it comes to migration policies, etc. I think they're better than the Finns now because the Finns went a little soft. But anyway, but in Norway, the debate is somewhat in between Sweden and Denmark. Norway is following Denmark, but it takes some time for them to get there.
And what you have in Denmark is that you have an old discussion around the Danish word is kulturkamp,
yes,
which is cultural struggle, which originated in the 19th century around Grundtvig and when the Danes want to be more, not just nationalistic, but they wanted to have their own parliament, they want to have their own say in things, and then they developed the idea of folkhögskola. Right. I'm also an educated folkhögskolelärare.
Yes, a folkhögskola teacher.
Yes, I'm a folkhögskolelärare. But so the idea that culture plays a role in politics and society was established early on in Denmark in a way that I would say that we've left in Sweden. We had that around the time of Strindberg, Selma Lagerlöf and Werner von Heidenstam, but since then we lost it. But in Denmark now there's a revival around the idea of kulturkamp.
Yes.
And it comes from the Christian Lutheran Danish church. And you have people like Katrin Winkelholm.
Yeah.
She was the head of Tryckfrihetssällskapet. I think she still is, by the way. She's a friend of mine. And she's also a priest.
Yes.
And I would say there's lots of priests, one called Langballe. There's a volume called Fram för frihet, which is a 70 years festschrift to Lars Hedegaard.
Right.
And I reviewed it, and I would say that at least half of the pieces in that are around the idea of Christianity, Danish Christianity, and what it means.
Yes.
And you would never find that in Sweden, that the Christian commentators discuss in this way. So I would say that Denmark, they have a long history of value and culture as a means of reviving society.
Yes.
We have more of engineering and industries and technology.
Sweden is good at social engineering.
Yes.
And
not cultural engineering.
I think in Sweden the idea was that it was the most modern country in the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know about this cultural map, I suppose.
Oh, of course, I've written about it. Yeah.
Yes, of course you have. And Sweden is up in the one corner. And the idea, I guess, for many would be that, but everyone else is going to follow Sweden.
Unfortunately, that is true.
Yes.
Yeah, because I've read, you know, the people who have done this map in Holland. They used to say that it was something called Americanization, which is that all countries in the West wanted to be like the US.
Yes.
But since the mid-90s, there is the concept of Swedenization. That's also in my book, The Swedish Story. So they actually found that many countries strive for that, because there's a correlation between a high growth of GDP and to be where the place of Sweden is.
Right.
So the more freer or secular or modern you are, the more richer you get. I don't know if that's true now, but the people who did this culture map, they wrote in 2006 that the Swedenization has replaced Americanization.
Yes. I wonder, since there is almost no conservatism to speak of in Sweden, but I wonder, do you see, well, the possibility of conservatism coming back in Sweden too? Do you think there's hope for Sweden in this respect?
Well, I think it will be a new kind of conservatives. I don't think it will be men my age and with you know, jackets and shirts. I will think more of a radical conservative youth movement, more like Malo Yiannopoulos and Paul Joseph Watson, and people who are proud young conservatives. Maybe under the age of 25, Lauren Southern in Canada.
Yes.
So the idea of conservatism as a lifestyle, where you have a certain sort of called the tweed.
Right.
I think that's gone. And there's a Swedish conservative journalist called Marika Formgren.
Yeah,
she wrote a piece in 2013, which she says that conservatives has to take off his tweed coat, tweed jacket, and she's in her 40s, she's a mother. But I would say that because when I was young, you were punk and you were radical, and I was a part of that, and you were against the establishment. Today the establishment is left.
Yes.
So to be against that, you have to be conservative. So to be opposed to your parents and society is actually to be conservative. Now, that doesn't mean that you dress or even your lifestyle is conservative, but you can have values.
Yes.
And I think Milo is the best example of that, or Breitbart, for instance, that you can be sort of a hip conservative, because many of the young people still want to be hip.
Yes.
And if they can be hip and be opposed to the establishment, they have to be hip conservatives. So the hipsters in Södermalm, which is a few blocks that way, then they're very conformistic and they're very mainstream.
Yes.
They might be hip, but they're not anti-establishment. So there's the idea of that to be conservative that's the new black.
Yeah, it's the new counterculture.
Yes, that's a new counterculture, and I'm very curious about how that will look. How will Scandinavian conservative counterculture look when the young take it, because the young will always be counter the establishment. Well, some will,
yeah.
And because that's a part. I mean, someone like Jordan Peterson, he's sort of conservative liberal, but he still says that we have to have a certain amount of freedom and rebelliousness in society in order to adjust.
Yes.
His idea is that you should build conservative societies, but you should always have a room for freedom, for liberalism, and for protest. So the conservative society can correct itself, because otherwise you don't understand what's wrong unless people protest. So he said that's a self-sustaining feature of a conservative society.
Right.
But we haven't spoken about Finland because, as I said, Norway is a nice country. I met Hege Storhaug.
Yes.
I was actually to translate a book into Swedish. It's called Islam, den landsfrågan Islam is called in Swedish.
Yeah, in Norwegian is Islam den 10:e landeplagen. I think.
Eller 11th.
Yeah, of course. 11th. Yeah, the 11th scourge. Den 11:e landeplagen. I read it in Norwegian.
Yeah, I did too actually, and it's a great book, and it's also been translated into Polish and English. But we haven't spoken about Finland, because Finland is, until now, the best example of a conservative society that have opposed migration, that has sustained its own national culture. But they're moving.
They want
to be like us.
They have been moving fast in the Swedish direction. And the thing is, with Finland, you had the internal conflict. You had the conflict along linguistic lines between the Swedish-speaking and the Finnish-speaking Finns.
Where explain to you is that the Swedes are Swedish-speaking Finns are like 5%.
Around 5%.
But they're very influential in money and culture.
Yes, at least some of them. Hashtag not all, but anyway. And their migration policies were pretty strict. They did take in some people.
Well, it was like 2,000.
Yeah,
when Sweden took in 50, they took in 2.
Yeah, but what they did before, they took in the people from Karelia when they lost Karelia, or
between Finland and Russia.
Yeah, they took in a lot of these people and they had to feed them and give them houses. But they were
Finns actually.
Yes, they were.
Spoke Finnish.
Yes, and when the Soviet Union started breaking down, they took in some of the remnants of the ethnic Finns living on the other side of the border. But they wouldn't call them refugees, even if they were in practice, because if they did, they might annoy the Russian neighbor. But until recently, they didn't have much non-Western or non-European immigration to speak of. That's a new phenomenon in Finland, but they had it for the last few years. And what I also noticed was they are getting the same opinion corridor as Sweden. I mean, you had, I think it was back in January, there was against a young true Finn, Finländarna, Sebastian Tynkkynen, who was sentenced for having said or for having written, I think he had written something about Islam, because he said it was a hate speech and it was a crime against peace of religions, and I couldn't imagine there would be any other religion involved in that. I don't think it was the Roman Catholics, he said something. No. So they have been getting these things. I hope they will move away from it, but the tendency...
I know, I went to Åland, which is an island between Sweden and Norway. Sweden and Finland. It's an independent part of Finland, and they speak Swedish there.
Yes.
And I learned that the Ålanders, or the people of Åland, they are much stricter than the Finns.
Interesting.
So there are ferries between Sweden and Åland every day.
Yes.
And if there was a family or some person saying, I want to seek asylum, they put in the police arrest over the night. Yes. And then they put that person on a ferry to Finland and say that Finland, you want to take care of refugees, that's fine, we don't. So they're very strict in Åland still, but I agree, it's going in the Swedish direction.
That's interesting, because I have noticed that the Swedish language media in Finland are extremely left liberal.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. I used to follow the discussions on Hufvudstadsbladet, the biggest Swedish-speaking news, but I can't. I just got too annoyed.
Yeah.
And since part of my family are Swedish-speaking Finns, My grandfather was a Swedish-speaking Finn, and he fought in Karelia and, well, all these things. And I thought, have they all went crazy? My grandpa, I know what he would have said about this.
Yeah. The same thing about the writer Jan Donner.
Yes.
He's a great guy, he's written great things, but in his last book he interviewed actually a friend of mine here in Stockholm, works with this Sweden Democrats, Robert Stenqvist.
Yeah.
And he just waited for Robert to say something that he can interpret in the way, in a racist way or whatever, xenophobic way, and I just saw a quote from that, but it was very, very sad, because he's actually a decent writer and he can think independently, but he has also gone into this open borders liberal idea. But if we talk about conservatives, I would say that the best place to discuss conservative ideas, I don't know if that's Finland, I don't think it's Sweden, of course. Might be Denmark, but it should also be Norway.
Yes.
Because there is an old tradition in Norway that I met a person called Inge Eimjellen who has a blog called Freedom Fighters Online, and he is a conservatist ideologue. And the things that he's written are very in depth around the ideas around conservatism. He's very influenced by American conservatism, but I still think that it might be that Norway is the best place for conservative politics, and of course Denmark. What do you think about that?
That's an interesting idea. I would have rooted for Denmark. Well, because they have an open debate. The policies are more sane when it comes to issues that has something to do with culture. Because I know they have a crazy tax system that's even worse than Sweden. I know that, but when it comes to things that are related to culture, the Danes are more conservative.
Yeah.
And I think, the Norwegians are, as I used to say, they are between Sweden and Denmark. But I mean, in Norway, for instance, you got May 17th, the National Day.
Yeah.
If you go to Oslo on that day, all the city is packed with people in their national costumes. You wouldn't see anything like that in the streets of Stockholm. I don't think you would see that in Copenhagen either.
No.
So,
but I would say that the rural identity of Norway is more conservative.
Yes, that's true.
And you see, both Sweden and Denmark are more industrialized in a way.
Yes.
And with the rural policies of Norway, where you actually give away a lot of tax money and support to the rural districts of Norway, I would say that you support a living conservative culture more than we do in Sweden and Denmark. Because we are much more export oriented, we are much more industrialized. So I think that Norway sort of sustains. But the problem with conservatism is that, of course, it can be people who discuss conservative ideas, Adam Smith or Friedrich von Hayek or any kind of like Douglas Murray or something, or Scruton. But it can also be the sort of everyday, popular, non-ideologic conservatives that people just want to go on with their own lives, don't have too much interference.
Yes. And
that kind of popular conservatism, I think, has stronger support in Norway. And in a way, you can also say that the environmental movements in Norway have a conservative leaning, because they didn't want the Norwegian energies or any kind of policies to disrupt the rural landscape of rivers and mountains in Norway. And you had that since the 70s, when you had occupation of the Alfdal mountain and all that. So in that sense, you see, the Green Party in Sweden is very, very left liberal, but you can also have a conservative interpretation of environmental politics, which I think you might have in Norway.
Yes, I think that might be the case. Unless, or I would ask, do you want to add anything before we end this conversation?
Well, in Swedish you say Svarte Petter, but the black card in the in all those 5 countries, we have to mention Iceland, that is of course Sweden. And will Sweden change? Will Sweden become more like Norway and Denmark? It has to, I think. When that will happen, next year we have an election here, 2018. It's going to be horrible. I think we have another bad period of very weak parliamentary discussions and solutions that won't work. So I actually think we're going to have a snap election before the next election, and that might do it. Otherwise, we have to wait another 4 or 5 years.
Yes.
Because the next election is 2022. Sweden is slowly moving, but it's moving very, very little and hesitantly and reluctantly. Many Swedes, I would say, maybe the majority, are still very afraid of having tough discussions. Right now when we speak, and there's an occupation in the square here in Stockholm where some 150 or 200 Afghanis, they're supposed to be minors, they're not minors. No. They've occupied a square here in Sweden, and they don't even have the permit to have their occupation. They should be thrown out of the country because most of them, or many of them, have been rejected in the asylum decisions already. But this, what's happening now is that the police are guarding this illegally arranged occupation, and of course the Swedish liberal, especially the women, are there to support the boys.
Yes.
And this is going in front of our eyes and on national television, and no one is doing anything. So many of the Swedes think that this is cruel to ask them if their age, or even measure teeth or hands or knees.
Yes.
So, and we just had this decision a few months ago where we actually started measuring, doing what you call age determination.
Yes.
Which showed that 80% of the people who were supposed to be minors weren't minors, they were above 18.
Yes.
So Sweden is